Now this is Costa Rica. Now Costa Rica is one of the best surf destinations on the planet. It promises warm water, tropical, laid-back living, a variety of different waves, and it's just one of those places that's really easy to go surfing regardless of your ability. So in this video, we're going to dive into everything you need to know about surfing in Costa Rica. So first up, we've got Tamarindo. This is a place and a wave that I've yet to surf. It's definitely high up on the list. If you guys have been there and you can let me know what the waves are like, please let me know down in the comments. But from what I've read, there's a pretty mellow, sort of longboarder, intermediate, beginner type beach break in town. A few other waves sort of up and down the coast. And then it's also the gateway to Witch's Rock as well, which is obviously an incredible wave. It's one that's very high up on my list, but unfortunately I didn't get to surf it this time. Then staying on the Nicoya Peninsula, we head down to Santa Teresa. Now, if you haven't already, please check out my complete guide to Santa Teresa where I break down all of the different spots. Santa Teresa is one of the best surf towns in all of Costa Rica, if not Central America. It's a thriving surfing slash backpacker town, sort of a digital nomad hotspot as well. Out front, you've got two long stretches of beach break. They're quite mellow, but they have fun peaks for sort of all different abilities. Kind of on the inside of them, you've got like lines of white water, which are obviously great for beginners. And then out back, you've got sort of playful left and right peaks. It's never got like crazy waves, but it's just very consistent and very fun. So it's a really cool place just to hang out, and you're almost guaranteed to be able to surf. Then heading south to Jaco, or just outside of Jaco actually. So just outside of Jaco, you've got Playa Hermosa. Now again, if you haven't already, please check out my complete guide to Playa Hermosa, where I didn't score it myself this trip, but I break it down a little bit and a few more detailed insights into the place. Now, it's a miles long black sand beach. It's really heavy, really hollow, really consistent. At low tide, it is a bit closeout prone, so unless it's really big, it's quite a hard wave to surf at low tide. It's definitely a little bit better at mid to high. That said, you kind of want it in that sort of 3 to 5 foot sort of range, so when it's sort of head to head and a half, that's when you're going to get it really good, and you want to head there in the wet season, so sort of between April and October. The deeper you go into that season, the more chance you're going to have of scoring it. I've only surfed it a few times and I've never really scored it that good, and it's just sort of teased me with what it's capable of, but I want to go there and score it when it's really good. So heading further down the west coast, further south, we've got Dominical. In town, you've got everything you need. There's shops, bars, restaurants, cafes, a few cool little hostels and hotels to stay at. Again, it's a really long stretch of exposed beach break. So like Playa Hermosa, it's really consistent. There's basically always waves there. If anything, you kind of have the opposite problem where a lot of the time it's too big and it's very closeout prone. Now, I've only spent around 10 days surfing in Dominical myself, but I found that in that time it was very closeout prone, especially at low tide. And it didn't need to be that big for that to happen. Like even on head high days, it was really straight and really hard to surf. It did get a bit better at high tide, but the waves broke a lot softer and it wasn't really as good. I'm not sure if it gets better in wet season when the rivers sort of run out onto the beach and like break up the banks a little bit. So if you spend a bit more time there than I do, please let me know what it's like down in the comments. So next up, we've got Pavones. Now Pavones is one of the best waves in Costa Rica, if not in Central America. It's an incredible wave, really long, world-class left-hand point break. I went there a couple of weeks ago and we scored it pretty good. Initially, I thought it was a very tricky wave to surf just because of the angle of it and the pace of the wave. I found it very tricky to surf on the backhand, or at least like attack on the backhand. You had to like race. It was really, but later in the week, I think the swell angle changed a little bit and it slowed up and it was, yeah, a lot better. Again, check out my full breakdown to Pavones if you haven't seen that already, which will give you some deeper insights into what it's actually like. Kind of got two sections. You've got the top section and then like the inside, but they don't generally link up. The inside is a lot better. It's a lot sort of cleaner and the wall is a lot more lined up. So the majority of the crowd surf the inside, but if you can get one off the crowd, then yeah, it's a really, really long wave. You can get some proper leg burners out there. And then finally, we head over to the Caribbean side to Puerto Viejo. So Puerto Viejo is kind of an anomaly. It's the only sort of surfing zone on the east coast of Costa Rica, and it works in the opposite season. So Puerto Viejo has got a few different spots. It's kind of got a mellow beach break near town, but it's actually known for its slab. So it's got a crazy slab there called Salsa Brava, which is really, really heavy and intimidating, and it's not really somewhere that I want to surf, to be honest, but please let me know if you've surfed it. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of the main surf spots in Costa Rica. Now, obviously there's a lot of coastline, there's many, many more spots that I haven't mentioned. They're kind of like lesser known spots, so obviously we can't talk about them on YouTube. So the best time of year to surf in Costa Rica is, it kind of has waves all year round. Now, generally for Central America, between April and October is like the surfing season. So that's when you'll score Pavones with the big south swells. It's when the beach breaks get really, really hollow and heavy. But even outside of this season, because all the west coast faces into like the great expanse of the Pacific, there's just kind of always waves. I've been there in January and had really fun waves, and there's waves every day. So yeah, it's kind of one of those places you can head there at any time of year and score fun waves, but generally you want to go between April and October. The only exception to this rule is Puerto Viejo, because that works in the opposite season, so you want to head there between December and March. That's when the Caribbean swells start coming in. And so getting to Costa Rica, so there's frequent flights from all over the world. You'll fly into San Jose. For flights, I always use Skyscanner or sometimes Kayak. I find those two websites to be the best for cheap flights. If you're coming from elsewhere in Central America, for example, from Nicaragua or Panama, you can take a shuttle bus. So shuttle buses are very common in Central America. If you check out Caribe Shuttle and Transport Zuma, they're two companies that transport people from Panama to Costa Rica and vice versa. So you can find routes between Managua and San Jose, or San Jose and Bocas del Toro in Panama, for example. So I'll leave links in the description where you can check those things out, because they're not super cheap, but you kind of share a minivan with other travelers, and they're usually pretty accommodating with surfboards, and it's quite an easy way to sort of get over the borders. They kind of help you along with that process. So that leads us on to our next point, which is getting around. So getting around in Costa Rica is pretty straightforward. If you're on a tight budget, like I have been this trip, you want to take the local buses. Now, the buses are really frequent and pretty well run. Now, often in Latin America, buses kind of operate on flexi time, and it's really common for them to be sort of half an hour late, and that does happen in Costa Rica, but I found out of all of the countries in Central America, they're the most punctual. You want to check out a company called Tricopa, and there's another one called TQP. So I'll leave the links in the description where you can check those out. They kind of have the most frequent routes all over Costa Rica. For example, we just took a bus from Dominical to San Jose. It cost around $20 each, which I thought wasn't too bad. It took around 4 or 5 hours. So yeah, I'll leave links in the description where you can check those companies out. You can also rent cars. Now, I've never done this myself just because I've always been on a budget when I've been in this part of the world, including this trip. But before I recorded this video, I did a bit of research and found that you can get hire cars between $30 and $50 per day. I know that varies depending on the time of year and what type of car you have, etc. But yeah, if you're coming for a week or two and you can afford to get a car, it's definitely the best way to get around, just because you'll have that extra freedom and flexibility of going to the surf spots whenever it's good and not have to wait by the side of the road for ages and piss around getting buses. I haven't done it here, but when I rent cars, I always use discovercars.com. That's my favorite rental car website. And then if you really want to splash out, you can fly domestically within Costa Rica. For example, you can fly from San Jose to Golfito, or you can fly from San Jose to a place called Cabano, which is close to Santa Teresa. So in terms of accommodation, now I found everywhere in Costa Rica, all the places that we mentioned today, they're very well established surf towns. So if you just jump on booking.com or Hostel World, they're my two favorite websites. You'll find anything you need really, from hostels to slightly more upmarket hotels. Generally, I found in most places you can find hostel rooms for around $19, $20 per night. And then as soon as you start getting a private room, it's going to cost around $40 per night. That's sort of the general rule I've found in most places. Obviously it varies depending on, time of year, demand, and I don't know, whatever other reason. But so in the description, I'll leave links to all of the places that I stayed during my Costa Rica trip and some of the best accommodations in each place. So just a couple of tips for surfing in Costa Rica. First up is the crowds. So obviously for such an established surf destination, it's going to be crowded. I don't want to put a downer on your Costa Rica trip because it's still an amazing place and you're still going to get so many waves. Now, all of these spots are super crowded. I found Pavones to be the most insanely crowded place in Central America. It's yeah, pretty next level. I mean, to be fair, when I surfed it, it was like the first proper south swell of the season, so it's probably extra crowded. But from what I've heard, it's pretty crazy there all the time. Same with like Santa Teresa, Dominical, Playa Hermosa, they're all pretty crowded, but because those are, you know, because they're not point breaks, they're like long stretched out beaches, there's always a lot of people surfing, but you can kind of get away from it. There's always a bit of like a shore break you can paddle into, or you can go to the next bank and it kind of spreads it out a bit. So you'll look at the surf in the morning, it'll be really busy, but then you'll be like, oh, actually there's kind of a bit of a gap over there, there's a little inside section here, so it's not really a problem. But that said, yeah, I definitely wouldn't head to Costa Rica expecting to be surfing on your own. Localism, so I know there is a bit of localism in Costa Rica, but generally I've found that the vibe is pretty mellow in Costa Rica. Obviously, like the locals get their waves, especially at Pavones, which is how it should be. I think that Pura Vida lifestyle sort of translates into the water quite well. I've never seen anything too aggro, especially at the beach breaks, because it's so spread out, it's pretty mellow. Costa Rica also has so many other wicked things to do. Check out Manuel Antonio National Park. It costs around $20 to visit. Beautiful beaches, jungle, wildlife. I'd also recommend checking out Nuaca Falls. Nuaca Falls is a beautiful waterfall just outside of Dominical. It takes around an hour and a half to walk there, and the walk is a little bit strenuous, but when you get there, you've got these beautiful cascading falls into this like sort of swim hole. The water's really clear, it's all nice and clean. It's a really beautiful thing to check out. And then otherwise, just sort of hanging out on the beaches, watching the sunset, soaking up all of that good Costa Rican stuff. I mean, that's why you go, right? You can find local meals for generally around $7 to $10 I've found. Maybe a little bit more if you're eating lots of meat, steak, but casados, gallo pintos, those kind of local dishes of rice and beans and chicken salad, you can find for around sort of $7 to $10. Info on Costa Rica in general, they use a combination of US dollars and colones. Generally, you'll use US dollars to pay for things such as hotels or those shuttle buses that you book online, but for smaller payments, so like local buses for restaurants, you'll generally pay it in colones. Now, most places take card in Costa Rica. The only thing you'll need cash for is some hotels and all the buses. So it's useful to have obviously your card and a combination of colones and US dollars on you at all times, just so you've got all bases covered. They speak Spanish in Costa Rica, and although in the main surf towns at a lot of the accommodations they'll speak English as well, it definitely pays to have some basic Spanish under your belt for when you're traveling between places. Even just being able to ask like where the bus is, how much it costs, how long does it take. Like, I only know very basic Spanish, but I've got just enough to be able to get by and kind of know what's going on. You can get a visa on arrival as well in Costa Rica for most countries, so that's pretty easy, and generally most passports get 3 months. So just as a general cost overview for a surf trip to Costa Rica, if you were doing it on a super tight budget, I'd say you'd spend $140 a week or $20 per night on a hostel accommodation. Then if you were buying your own food, so not necessarily eating out at restaurants, you'd spend around $100, maybe $150 on groceries per week. And then bus journeys between these major towns tend to be between 20 and 30 US dollars. So as a total, your weekly cost would be between $300 and $350 US dollars. Obviously you can do it a little bit cheaper than that. If you want to take things up a notch and have a bit more luxury in your life, I'd say that if you wanted a private room, you'd spend closer to $280 US dollars per week. And then if you wanted to sort of cook your own food but go to restaurants as well, I'd say you'd spend closer to $150 per week. And then let's say you do an excursion like visit a national park, that's another $20. And then if you get a rental car for the week, that sets you back another $250. That's closer to about $700 for the week. So there's quite a big difference. As soon as you start doing those slightly more luxurious comfort sort of things, it's a lot more expensive. So yeah, I hope that gives you a bit of an overview as to what to expect from a surf trip to Costa Rica. As well, guys, thank you so much for watching all of these videos, because you guys are the sole reason I make this kind of lifestyle possible. Without you watching, commenting, liking on these videos, I wouldn't be able to come and explore all of these amazing places. So thank you so much. For now, it's goodbye from me, and I'll see you in the next episode.